The last time this was here was on April 27th, 2011. The comments were, it was continued indefinitely with the following comments. Provide a Phase 2 Historic Structures Letter Report with respect to the impact that the proposed mechanical equipment, parapet, and placement of stairs in front of the leveled plaza will have on the appearance of the historic structure and setting. Any design should more closely resemble the original design's simplicity and the intent of the original architect. Simplify the plant palette to 3 or 4 plant types. Consult with the City Access Advisory Committee with respect to the proposed ADA access ramp. Provide spot elevations of existing and proposed topography. This is the Libero Theater. Comments only. The project requires environmental assessment, historic resource findings, and findings for alterations to a historic landmark. Introduce yourselves, please, and give us a brief presentation. And speak directly into the microphone.
My name is Matt Diaz. I'm an architect with KBZ.
Joe Wilcox, architect with KBZ.
Don Seymour with KBZ.
Welcome all.
Don, do you want to start with a little brief intro?
If you'd like, since so much time has passed, we could give you a quick summary of why we're doing this project.
Okay.
The project started out as an interior refurbishment, and we soon reached the trigger point where we were required to provide an accessible path of travel. The existing brick paving starts sloping continuously from the face of the columns at the exterior facade straight down to the Cañón Perdido sidewalk. So we
It's
would
about a 10.2% slope.
correct.
Yeah.
So we'd be required to provide a level landing in front of the columns. Concurrently with this project, during our research phase, we have been going out to the UCSB archives to look through the George Washington Smith and Luna Maria Riggs collections. And we found out that the original design that was actually permitted by the city indicated a flat brick or flat paving at the front with steps starting right at the Cañón Perdido sidewalk. And there was quite a bit of correspondence during construction on the project where there were a lot of items that were value engineered out of the project. So we feel that probably due to budgetary reasons, the sloped path was put in rather than the level paving and steps. So.
Well, you've seen these diagrams, these drawings from George Washington Smith. We kind of showed you the original stairs that were drawn in elevation and section. I think the key word here with the design team has been, since the last meeting, is keep it as simple as possible. This demolition plan indicates all the paving that will be coming out around all 3 sides of the building, including this 10.2% slope to the sidewalk. Right now, the hedges that surround the lawn area will be coming out as well, and the landscape will talk about how they're going to address that. We're also removing a portion of the city sidewalk over here in order to take care of the grading issues, and as well as stormwater and access. Matt, anything else on the demo that I haven't thought about?
We will be salvaging portions of the existing brick for
Right.
reuse.
Yeah, in fact, the reuse, we've talked with the historian about how to reuse the brick in the area. You'll see a pattern right up the front of the stairs that will use the brick in that zone there. We have met with the Access Committee, which you mentioned in the previous minutes, and you'll see the design. The Access Committee is fine with the location of the accessible ramp. We did studies of 3 or 4 different possibilities for the accessible ramp. We're not going to show those to you because the final solution is really what everybody seems to agree with. In plan view now, what we've created is this esplanade that the Libero Theater can use on a level surface for before and after performances, so you're not standing on this brick driveway now that slopes down. These are 3 bays of existing stairs. We've got the lawn area in here. We've left this open now, where before there was a hedge there, so now as you come up, you can walk, kind of meander through here and not have just a path that's going to get worn through the lawn. We're redoing all the bricks back through here, creating an accessible ramp off of this parking structure area. This is the area of the new accessible ramp. We do have a seat or a planter wall here that originally we had a hedge in front. We've taken that off. We've simplified it. We do have some 3D renderings that we'll eventually get to show you that really the simpler we got, the better we all liked it. Meeting with the landscape architect, the civil engineer in terms of stormwater, and also with Alex Cole in terms of historic report. Anything else here, Matt? Don? No?
No, I think the other thing was it's down just to a simple plaster seat wall. It doesn't have any tile cap or stone cap or anything. We didn't introduce any new material.
And we are doing improvements to the interior, but we can tell you about that if you have questions about that down the road. More comfortable seating. Air conditioning. Here's the front elevation off the south side, showing the stairs coming up, similar to what the George Washington Smith drawings had. This is the accessible ramp area with a very simple wrought iron rail. Oh yeah, we've got a parapet here for the air handler that we're adding because we're adding air conditioning to the building. This parapet height was 7'4". And right now you can see from the parking structure, you can look over and see existing units up on this flat roof. So we kind of bumped it in for that. Anything on the east elevation, Matt, that we need to point out? Yeah, Matt, tell them about those.
We have the existing doorway here. These are the two exits from the theater, the auditorium. This one's remaining much as it is now. This one we have to provide a stair because it actually currently has a sloping ramp coming down which
about
exceeds the
15% slope.
So,
it's not very safe.
So we're adding a stairway there.
Yep. And those are required exits off the auditorium.
Yeah, the same thing off of this side. In a similar fashion, the stage side exit door is pretty much staying flat and remaining the same. But we do have stairs coming off of the secondary exit. And this is the existing portico, which now has stairs to fix the existing slope condition, which exceeds the allowable.
Here's an existing aerial of what's there now. If you want to refer to it, but this is the 3D renderings from two views. It shows a very simple wall, and I think this building really needs a nice platform to present it. I've always felt like that entrance is like a brick driveway.
Finished with the presentation?
Do we want to talk about the landscape?
Yeah, I think, Bob, you want to?
Yes, let Bob talk about landscape. Let him have your chair.
I will disclose that I did meet with Mr. Cunningham and someone from his office about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And then prior to that, about 6 months ago, I met with Mr. Cunningham and Ms. Cole at the site. Nothing really to report from that meeting, from either meeting.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Bob Cunningham, landscape architect. I'm unrolling 3 copies of the same plan that you have in front of you, with the difference being there are a couple of plant photographs added just in case. Sorry, thank you. We took your direction from the last meeting and simplified the plan dramatically. The major elements of the plan are now simply 2 panels of lawn in front, flanking the plaza, 2 trees, which are carob trees that we're proposing to use in place of the existing olive trees. If you all recall, the olive trees are diseased. The disease is in the soil. The soil cannot be treated. The soil cannot be removed effectively to prevent further contamination, because the disease is in the soil adjacent and would migrate back onto the site. So in our work with the project arborist, in trying to find a suitable substitute for the olives, we settled on the carob, which is, if you want to call it an old-fashioned tree, it's a tree that has been used in landscaping for a number of years. It hasn't been used so much recently as in the old days, but in my opinion, I think it's entirely appropriate to this site, and in its ultimate form and size will rival the olive trees and provide as close an equivalent to the olive trees as we could possibly get. We've found a couple of 60-inch box trees, one of which is photographed on the drawing that you have. And so my understanding is the trees are about 15 feet tall, 12-foot spread. They will be pruned to reflect a nice multiple trunk structure, and again, I think they'll do a great job. The lawn that we're proposing is a native bent grass. The photograph of that also on the drawing. That can be mowed or it can be left unmowed, and it doesn't get that deep. It'll be about a 6-inch long leaf blade. Probably will be mowed by the maintenance staff. The reason that we're going to this lawn is it's a native. It uses much less water than the grass that's currently at the site. There is no planting at the base of the seat wall, as Joe described earlier. Again, we're going for a simpler look. There is one existing Dracaena or I believe it's Dracaena on the site now that we're leaving in place. We're proposing a pair of dwarf Italian cypress flanking the main entrance. And our cue from that came from earlier photographs that did include a couple of, we believe, Italian cypress. When I say dwarf, it's subject to interpretation. The Italian cypress will get to be 60 feet. The dwarf plant that is available in nurseries nowadays will probably get to 20 feet and taller. So essentially what we get is something that won't have to be sheared as often as a regular Italian cypress. All of the landscaping along the Paseo on the west side will be removed and held in boxes and then replaced. It will be simplified. We've gone to a palette that involves maybe a half a dozen plants total, but the existing palm trees and camellias and so on that are there will be replaced back into the site. The small ground cover along the front of the building and in the western Paseo is a Dianella. That's on the left-hand margin. There's a photograph of that just under the Kentia palms. And we'll also be adding the lawn under the two existing olive trees on the Anacapa Street side, as well as the panel in between. And then the big issue now is what we do along the frontage of Perdido Street and Anacapa Street. And we've got a couple of options there. The initial intent was to plant a hedge, and that's essentially what we still hope to do. But we've got stormwater issues that we're trying to address, and the best plant to use along those stretches of the back of the sidewalk is a plant that will actually absorb and filter stormwater as it goes through the soil profile. That is the what is that?
Juncus patents.
Juncus patents, yes. California rush, and you can see a photograph there. It's obviously not a hedge. I think if you squint your eyes from across the street, you will perceive hedge, but it's not the clipped hedge that we're used to. That said, this site was never intended for a clipped hedge. The original design gives no indication of a clipped hedge anywhere on the property, simply panels of lawn. So we would like to get approval for the California Rush. If we cannot do that, if you all feel that that's simply too far astray from a traditional landscape design, then our alternative is the African boxwood, which can be clipped as a hedge. It's a very drought-tolerant plant. What we will need to do if we go with that or any kind of traditional broadleaf evergreen hedge would be to replace the soil in those locations where we've got the infiltration prospect, because planting the hedge in the native soil will not permit water to infiltrate down through the soil profile into the stormwater facilities below. We can do that with the rush because it will provide an absorption on its own, but without the rush, we need to have a faster draining soil medium, which will increase the cost of the project by about $3,000 plus. So that's essentially it in terms of what we have that you may feel is controversial. We'd, again, like to get approval for the rush. And that completes my wordy presentation.
Are you in charge of pavement, or is that you?
I am not.
It's us.
Okay.
And
So
we've been working with Steve Flowers, working out all the stormwater management issues on this
I'm
site.
interested in the material. I don't think you mentioned what the material would be.
This area right here will be the same brick that's on the site now,
Uh-huh.
and then the rest of it will be brick to match.
New brick, tumbled or
Tumbled,
aged.
aged, vintage brick.
And I'm sorry to go into questions before the rest of the commission, but how are you separating that?
With this border right here of brick. So there's a border along here that aligns with this edge of the stair, and there's a border right there, so we've kind of figured that panel would be a nice place to use all the existing brick, as opposed to scattering it throughout, because we're not going to be able to use all of the brick, but we'll be able to use a large percentage of the brick.
And then
we have a border all the way around.
And then this is new brick,
All new brick to look like it's old.
new aged brick.
New aged brick.
Ooh, that sounded too Christian. Too crystal.
New aged brick.
New aged.
Sounds like a rock band.
Sorry. Okay. You're concluded. Let's start with questions. Yes.
I just
Ms.
have a quick
Gans.
question regarding the ADA. Have you been in contact with Building and Safety, showing them what you're doing? And okay, great. And then the other item was Historic Structures Report. I know that was part of, I just want to explain for the public, that is required. I see it waving as a flag in the audience. So that will be submitted, I assume, and then, this is just kind of a second set of comments that you're looking for, basically,
Right.
and we
Kind
are
of.
allowing that. Thank
The
you.
way I understood it was that there was significant value engineering that went on, and so that sort of changed some of the
yeah.
plans that you wanted in progress review.
And the last item was, it sounds like the sidewalk is being improved,
Correct.
The public
So-
sidewalk
Right.
the public sidewalk.
along
So you don't
Anacapa.
need,
Along
have you
Anacapa.
spoken with Public Works and they're, oh, you haven't, Ben?
No, we haven't done that.
You need to do that.
We have met with,
Okay.
like you said, Building and Safety, and we actually provided them a plan that we all
Right, that's
signed off. and
for
we all
ADA,
agreed.
but if you're dealing with the public sidewalks, you do need to speak to somebody or show
Okay.
Public Works a plan. Thank you.
Okay, so questions from the commission? Oh, public comment. Any member of the public wish to speak to this item? No? Then I will close public comment and go to questions from the commission. Commissioner Winnick.
Mr. Chair. Okay, so I have a couple questions. First, question on the architectural or the hardscape, and then a couple questions on the landscape. So, or maybe just one question on landscape. So the question for the hardscape is, I heard the explanation about the rationale for putting in the stairs in order to meet ADA to get to a level surface at the entry. So one question I have, Mr. Wilcox, is if you had studied, if you were to still bring in the access ramp you have, would you be able to have a zone of, meet the ADA requirements, have that flat zone by the entrance, but still keep the slope going down to the sidewalk?
It would not create a legal slope from that new toe or top of the slope down. And also the desire of the client is to really have this as a space that people can enjoy before and after an intermission. And now you're kind of standing on an angle and
Your wine glass is tipped, and it's just a mess.
yeah, but we did look at that, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but Matt and I kind of drew a section through there to see if it would work, and it does not work.
Okay.
There's not enough run there to get it.
All right. That was
It's a good
And actually, it
question.
makes it more steep
Sure.
Okay.
because you're going from here to there.
Right. So I'm avoiding comment. Well, I have a tendency to go into comment before. So that was the main question I had there. Another question is, and I didn't look close enough perhaps when you had the George Washington Smith references, but in your rendering, maybe Mr. Chair can put that rendering on the camera, you'll see that there's the large steps on that wall next to the railing. So my question really is what was the precedent that you were looking at for those large steps in the side walls next to where the handrails were? If we could see that again.
If you look at the George Washington Smith drawings. Section.
I don't think the section really addressed it.
It doesn't address it. So that was just a decision we thought would be the simplest decision for that, as opposed to a raked top, which I think it wouldn't really fit this building.
Well, another question I would have is, had you thought of trying to integrate the railing with the wall rather than having two separate elements?
I think we thought it was simpler to have the rail just stand free, because that's how all the other rails are around the building that were original to the building. They don't engage with the site wall.
And it also fits well with that intermediate rail,
Okay.
which is required.
Well, okay, then the follow-up question would be, is the wall really necessary? Coming up that high relative to the steps.
So could the steps daylight into the lawn?
Exactly. Thank you.
We could study that.
All right, those are just questions. Now, the one question I have on the
I
landscape.
think the relationship with this wall will be very important, this cross wall, as to how this wall looks, but yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the question on the landscape is really about the California rush. So I'll phrase a question, but with a comment. I guess I don't think it would look like a hedge, but I think that's, me personally, that's okay. My question is if you want to be successful with that kind of planting styles, would it not make sense to actually have it, normally when I see that used, it would be perhaps around the full perimeter of each of those inset panels that are occurring along Anacapa, rather than just at the edge. In other words, if it's not going to ever have the density that a hedge would have, and you would see it more as let's say a rectangle or a square if it were around the perimeter. So I'm wondering if you had given any consideration to how to use it rather than trying to emulate a hedge with it. Does that make sense? It's a leading question, of course.
Well, we felt that we would use it at the edge of the public-private, intersection, but that it was not necessary to use it elsewhere. And we're only using it along Anacapa Street, where we've got the biofiltration function, and along Perdido Street for the same reason. That's why we do not have it on the corner, on the east side of the lawn. We prefer not to have it at all, but along Perdido, because we've got the lawn at a grade that is reasonably usable and more level, we do have a drop-off there that we have to accommodate, and we felt it would be best to use a hedge-like material there. And then obviously along Anacapa Street, we've got the stormwater issues. So we wanted to keep it as simple as possible, reduce the amount of maintenance to the degree possible, and every square foot of landscaping that needs to be maintained other than just mowing a lawn becomes more costly and involves more green waste.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rios, questions?
Yes. I'd like you to explain a little bit more the removal of the sidewalk on Anacapa Street. How much is going and,
And how much are you putting back? Is that your question?
no, that wasn't, but it'll work.
Okay, the quantity that's going, it's here.
This is the demo plan.
Yeah,
so-
let me just double check here. Yeah. Basically from here, right, Matt, to there.
It's going
To
up,
there.
it's going up to here,
Oh, that's right.
from there to there.
Is it called out on the demo map? I don't see it.
Yeah, it's demoed right there, the dash.
Oh, the dash lines. I can't read the dash lines from here. Okay. The dash lines are shown there. And that's basically being done in order to take care of these grading issues and these entrances and exits off of the building.
So, I'm sorry, may I tag along?
Yeah, and then I have other questions.
So are these, is this then raising up?
Do you recall, Matt?
I can probably explain.
Yeah.
It's actually, at the curb edge, it's staying exactly the same. What's actually being done is to meet these landings and to get rid of an excessive cross slope that happens on the sidewalk currently. So we're trying to address the accessibility issues that we will be triggering with the work on the project. So that's one area, and the same thing on Perdido side. So we're basically it's going to meet up right here and meet up right there, but in between, and meet up along the curb, but in between, it's being adjusted so that the cross slope doesn't exceed 2%.
All right. I noticed that you are removing benches. Are you planning on replacing benches?
Right now, they do not want to replace the benches.
I can tell you as somebody who is, when I go someplace, I like to be able to sit down. To require somebody to stand all the time, I'm commenting.
Well, that we are creating actually more area to sit
Yeah.
because of the low
The
wall.
low wall.
Yeah,
So-
seat wall there.
There's
There's
a seat wall around that whole
Right.
perimeter.
But you should look at your clients and accommodate them, and some of them are going to want to be able to sit and talk to friends out there, and that's of my concern.
On a bench with a back?
Pardon?
On a bench with a back as opposed to a backless bench?
I'm not fancy, I've got my foot on a garbage bag can now.
Okay.
You've got to look at the,
So we'll actually
Any
have
other
more
questions?
lineal foot of bench with the new design.
I'm sorry.
We'll have more lineal footage of bench with the new design
Yeah,
because of the seat wall.
I think that's good.
And you're right, every time I go by the Libero, there's somebody on those benches.
Oh, yeah.
So there'll be more room for more people now.
Any other questions, Commissioner Rios?
No, that's
Commissioner
good for
Lavoie?
now.
I have a question mostly about the landscape plan. I have reservations about the reed.
Bring it back,
being
please.
proposed.
Bob has one. Thank you.
The California Rush. The photograph that you have is how I'm used to seeing it, and I think it's a very contemporary plant material. I don't remember seeing it 10 years ago. And therefore, I really have reservations about putting it in front of this building. How thick is it going to be? I mean, you talk about a hedge of it. I mean, I usually see it planted in this 4-inch space, and you get like 3 of them deep if you're lucky.
Yeah, I don't have a scale on me. I'm guessing from our plan it's 2.5 feet
So
width.
wide.
Yes.
So we planted dense 2.5 feet?
Yes.
Do you plan on trimming the top of it level? Or let it go wild?
We will need to speak with the Loberos maintenance people about that. I would have no objection.
Is it something that when it reaches a certain height that just fails and blows off, or
It stops growing,
at a certain height?
yes. But I
Not
can't,
unevenly, though.
it's uneven, correct.
Okay.
The photo that you see here on the plans is a fairly good representation of a mature, maybe slightly shy of maturity, but it's pretty close to it. Wouldn't you say, Mr. Cunningham?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that's what you would see.
Okay, that was my only question.
Okay. Commissioner Murray, question?
Yeah, show me again the path of travel for the ADA. I'm sorry, I missed that one.
Okay. Path of travel for the ADA is off of this sidewalk, up this walkway, a ramp to the front.
Okay. Commissioner Sharp, questions?
Yeah, it's also regarding the rush. Every time I've seen it, it's always against a higher wall than the 12-inch or so high wall that this is going to be against. It seems to me that kids playing, people falling off the sidewalk would crush these. I'm serious. Would crush these, and then they would have to be replanted and so forth, unlike a hedge, which usually comes back. And I just wondered if you thought about that.
I just double-checked with Matt. There is no wall along here. The original design had a wall, but there's no wall there now.
I was just looking at,
Yeah.
It's basically a flush curb.
but nevertheless,
Concrete.
that's even worse, because people will just walk through there onto the lawn.
Okay, well, let's get Mr. Sharp's question answered first, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, the rush will actually recover faster than a hedge would. Any woody plant is going to take longer to regenerate growth than the rush would. So in terms of damage, it'll grow back more quickly. And if we don't need an edge there, then perhaps we're not talking about the can of burrito side. Joe?
Well, it seems to me that edge is going to interrupt the flow of water.
We've studied what would have to do without a hedge or a plant material transition here. We've studied if the lawn were to go right down to the sidewalk, you would end up with a pretty deep swale that would not be, it would be a tripping hazard. It would really not be right. It would be wet all the time, and it just, in order to collect all the water that the storm water people need and Steve Flowers, we need something there to receive the water.
Okay. Commissioner Murray, you had a question?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Commissioner Boucher?
I'll come back.
I was just wondering.
Microphone.
Thank you. It's now on. Thank you. Have you looked into the idea of finding something that would work similarly but would not be that rush?
Exhaustively.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Drury, questions?
Yes. Are the wrought iron railings?
Thank you.
Are they an ADA requirement?
Yeah.
Building department requirement.
I know my hearing's not good. So that you have to have 4.
Yes.
You have to have the 2 in the middle.
8 inches max, something there. It's a code issue.
It's just not
Whatever the latest
no
code is.
fiddling about with it.
No.
But the low walls in the front are not part of that. That's just an architectural decision.
Are you referring to
Yes,
the
those.
ones off?
Right. The ones off the new flat.
Well, there's quite a slope off of the brick paving.
Yes.
So we wanted to stop it. So there's at night
Okay.
when there's a big crowd of people, they're not going to tumble down the.
Oh, they will anyway, but that doesn't matter.
To fall over
And
the-
so the other thing is, practically speaking, have you thought about protection against skateboarding hordes?
Yes.
Because
You
that
have to.
will
We'll have
happen.
to.
We
Absolutely.
will have to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Murray, did you remember your question?
Oh, I did.
You better have some food. It better be good.
2 more hours
Put
here.
it back. Is it exactly the same sidewalk as it is now? Or are you
I would think we would want to match exactly the same scoring pattern and the type of concrete. And I would like to mention, when we've met with Alex Cole and the civil engineer and the landscape architect about this issue, it's really, as Alex put it, it's the competing goods here. We're trying to come up with the solution for competing goods. It's all good stuff. It's all stuff we have to do. So it's not just something we've dreamed up.
May I add one
Quickly.
thing? Well,
It better be good.
okay.
Actually, it's two. I would like to leave today with a straw vote regarding the trees, the tree replacements, because the carobs are not readily found on the market, and we've got a couple of them held, and we'd like to be able to.
We will accommodate you on that point.
And then also, if we end up at an impasse on the rush versus the African box, would it be possible perhaps to put the African box on the Cañón Perdido Street side and the rush on the Anacapa Street side?
Okay.
Maybe an inconsistent look, but I think it would certainly help us halfway.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Can I ask mine? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Boucher.
Are the olives original?
Yes, they are. The two that we're removing, unfortunately, are the two on Anacapa Street are more recent, and
Yes.
they're healthy trees, and the
Yeah.
idea is to, keep them as long as they're,
Okay,
as long as they're healthy.
okay, thank you.
A little bit later.
Yeah, I know they're younger.
They're original insofar as they predate the Comport plan.
Okay.
They've been there for a long, long
Yeah.
time, but maybe they weren't planted the day that the building was finished.
Questions from the chair. Are there any street trees on Cañón Perdido?
1932.
And if not, why?
Good question. We haven't asked that of anybody.
Okay.
We will investigate that if it's the desire of the commission to have street trees.
Okay. Or find out why
Sure.
we don't have them.
I fear that the designated tree is the ficus, so we'd need to deal with that.
Separate designation or a substitute designation. Is there anything preventing you from removing the sidewalk at the back of the curb between the trees? In other words, is this a parking area here? Could this be landscape between the trees?
It's all red curb.
It's all red carpet. So you could be landscape.
Okay. Third question is, if you're trying to get water from the building and from the lawn into this bioswale, why is there a curb or a brick edge there which would interrupt the water?
Part of the reason for the brick edge is to actually slow down the water, so it's almost acting like a riprap in a sense. One of the things we're actually looking at doing is we have sort of a dual treatment system in that section. So we have the backstop, if you will, of the brick that filters into the whichever hedge we end up with, but it filters into that area as our secondary treatment, and then it discharges off the site.
So you're expecting when the lawn gets saturated to field capacity that the water will build up and spill over the brick edge?
The brick edge is actually partially porous, so yeah.
Partially wet?
Partially porous. So it's like spaced.
Okay.
It's spaced out.
But part of what we're taking a lot of the esplanade hardscape, so the sort of flat surface hardscape is actually also going into that same area. So it's kind of that front. We've got a lot more treatment on that side than we do on the Anacapa side.
Spending too much time on a very minor point, but it seems to me you've answered my question. Comments? Commissioner Winnick. If you would please weigh in specifically on, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but specifically the trees and specifically the material at the back of the sidewalk on both Anacapa and Cañón Perdido.
All right, so I'll weigh in on that, and then I'll talk about the architecture or the
Great.
hardscape. So on the landscape, I could certainly support the carob trees. They look like they will mature nicely as a species. And interestingly enough, and this relates to the architecture comment I'm going to make, I like the openness of the Libero. It seems to make sense. Not every part of the city is that way. Like, for instance, I'll even comment on the street trees. I think it's actually good that there aren't street trees in this instance. I think it's better to have the focus on the trees, the carobs that will be on the site, and have it as open as possible. So in that spirit, I could support the rush because I think I like the idea of it being a more open feel and not such a hedge. And maybe this is one of those times where we do sort of follow one of those Secretary of the Interior standards of knowing that something's different than the original. And the rush clearly would signify it's not original and it's set apart and different than what was originally there. In terms of the architecture, and I don't know the solution, I'm just going to propose the quandary. I also like the openness of the current brick pathway that leads up to the building. I find it to be quite inviting. Sure, you might be standing on a slight incline when you're drinking a glass of wine. I don't find that to be terribly objectionable. So, I mean, if we didn't have to deal with the ADA, I, in fact, would not support this. And what I really would like is I would love to see some additional study to figure out how ADA access might be able to be implemented without changing the nature of the entrance. What I don't like, I'll tell you my objection, what I don't like about the stairs, and I think, you designed it nicely, but I don't like the separation that it creates between the building and the environment leading up to it. I think that's one of the charming things about the Libero currently. And then, failing that study, I think there's something a little too strong about containing, let's say, about the walls that are proposed, and that's why I asked those questions about the walls relative to the railings. I won't elaborate beyond that, but I just think that if, in fact, no other approach can be taken, I think that needs much further study. Thank you.
You pretty clearly said that you don't support the steps. Am I hearing that?
I don't, given understanding that this is being studied and that they have to meet ADA requirements, and you have these different things that affect a project, and I understand that meeting the ADA requirements could perhaps override my concern from a historical perspective.
How do you feel then about the George Washington Smith plans that show a stairway there?
It's one of those interesting things. I've been involved in a lot of projects which go through many iterations, and a lot of times, you may think the iteration was chosen because of cost savings or something, but a lot of times an architect will come through and we'll question what they did.
On the site?
Yeah, and we'll change it. And so without having stood there or having George Washington Smith's little icon on my shoulder whispering in my ear, I don't really know.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting that he studied it, and that's why I also asked to see the precedent again, to see how the walls might have been treated.
Okay.
So, anyway.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Arias.
Well, I'd like to know precisely what is infecting the tree. Is it fungus or what?
It's a fungus. I believe it's fusarium. Mm-hmm. That's the technical term for it.
And do you know that the suggested substitute trees are resistant to it?
Yes, that was one of our main criteria in selecting the alternates.
And it's within the soil, and you don't think that eventually the trees on Anacapa will be affected or not?
We do think they'll be infected, and they'll eventually have to be removed, but we have no idea how long that'll take. So there's no point removing them now because they are healthy trees.
And even fumigation of the soil is not an effective treatment?
That would kill the trees as well.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking of...
Now, Duke McPherson is our arborist, and he's studied this very carefully, and he's consulted other arborists and pathologists about this. And it's his opinion that, we should act, in the direction we're following now.
Well, I'm thinking that if you do remove these trees, and you can, through fumigation of the soil, prevent the fungus from spreading to get to these trees, it might be to your advantage.
I will talk to Mr. McPherson about that. I think you make a good point. If we can...
I don't know, but it's something
Sure.
for you to consider.
Yeah, if we can forestall its migration by fumigating the soil and then re-landscaping, sure, that might be possible.
As far as the steps, I have questions. It's nice to have street trees, and I believe in that, but this is a building that I really think needs to be set out there in prestige condition, and would be reluctant to see any vegetation that would cut back from the view of this building. So I'm not sure that street trees are appropriate at that point. The steps, I have mixed feelings about them, but I think they do act as a good entranceway to the theater, which is rather nice. I'm glad that there'll be places for people to sit. I hope you look very seriously at that, because the clientele is not always spring chicken. I'm not a spring chicken, so I can say that. So people, if they want to socialize, they want to also be able to sit and things like that. It gives them an added option. Other than that, those are my only comments.
Thank you. I want to remind the Commission that we are now 5 minutes behind. Commissioner Lavoie, if you could provide your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the carob tree, the use of the carob tree, and after some consideration, I think the reeds will be fine. If they don't work, they'll be replaced. The architectural solution, I think, is commendable. It's much simplified. It's very much in keeping with Smith's work, very much in keeping with at least the drawings, if not his final intention for the building. There was some question about the steps on either side of the step wall.
The cheek wall.
Yeah, the cheek wall. I think it's appropriate that they should be stepped, as shown. The only suggestion I might have to the plan is that the vertical pickets for the handrail have some type of embellishment, perhaps at the top as it joins either a split and just something more than a post hitting the rail.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
I think the building board deserves it.
Is that all?
That's it.
Commissioner Murray?
I don't have much to add. I agree with the comments of Mr. Lavoie's comment. I would like to see, I mean, other than the back, I guess the read, it just doesn't seem formal to me, and I'm just thinking this just needs a kind of a formal hedge or a formal something. So I'm just throwing that out for you to look into. Or at least show me how the grass is going to look formal.
Okay. Commissioner Sharp?
While I certainly don't mind the existing sloping walk-up, I certainly understand the need for the stairs. The plus side is it sort of sets the building off as on a plinth, and I think accentuates and announces the building a little better. I certainly don't see any reason for street trees. When we looked at the additional air conditioning that was put on the west side, you didn't need screening at that point, or we were convinced that it would not be seen. But you're adding more air conditioning on top, in addition to that?
It's all being screened.
There's no additional from what was before.
It's the same as before.
Same. Yeah, we had to raise the wall from before.
Okay, well, we looked at that, and we approved doing what we were convinced that was a good solution at that time, and I wonder what has changed. So I would have to look at that in person. And I am not in favor of the rush. I think that they're too contemporary and too vulnerable. They may grow back faster than a hedge, but they certainly are more fragile. That's all.
Okay. Commissioner Boucher, microphone.
I've already turned it on.
Commissioner, microphone.
Yes, Commissioner, no microphone. I agree with the comments that have been made. I find the reeds not to be in keeping with this particular building. Indeed, we don't see much of that used in the historic area.
And you're okay with the carob or not?
Yeah, I am. I'm so sorry to lose the olive.
Yeah.
So.
Commissioner Drury, comments, please.
I agree with Commissioner Winnick's. I wish that we didn't have to have this. I guess the idea for me is that the building is such a unique building, and everything curves toward a kind of a human scale entry, and then there's that big soaring edifice behind it. And I'm really, I'll be sorry to see, it seems to trivialize the building, quite frankly, to me. The steps, the railings, the low walls, it seems to make it less important somehow. I understand the idea of a plinth, but I love the idea of that big curved space leading into the building, and I will support it, but only reluctantly. Thank you.
How about weigh in on the carobs and the junkets?
I would, my preference would be for no trees at all in front, and I don't like the rush.
Okay. Just a quick question, Mr. Cunningham, what is happening with the memorial boulder?
It's being removed.
Okay. And I'm assuming you have permission from the boulder donor.
I don't.
We're working on it.
Okay. My comments would
We're going to
be,
relocate the plaque.
my comments would be that I could support the carobs. I can't support the rush. I can't support the light fixtures as proposed on top of the columns like that. Typically, that type of pole fixture would be on the ground, not on the plinth. I think I just leave my comments at that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One other comment. The second parapet, the molding should not match either the molding below it or the molding above it. It should either be a reduction of either one of them.
And I'm sorry, I did have two more comments. No need to study street trees on Cañón Perdido. It seemed clear to me that the Commission doesn't want to see street trees. And the last comment would be to study enlarging the planters between the palm trees on Anacapa Street. Okay. What would you like? Indefinite 2-week? I'd say indefinite, but that's me.
Indefinite.
Okay. Somebody want to make that motion, please? Motion by Arias. Thank you, Judy. Second, anyone? Second by Boucher. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. I'm hoping staff got the summary of the comments. I don't have the time to.
I got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's ours.
We want to keep.
I think we should keep those. Yeah. Huh? I'm sure they have copies.
Take that back.
Is that not a copy?
That's not part of it.
It's scanned. We scanned it all.
Okay, but I mean, it's part of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll give it to her. We scanned it all.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, like a wedding cake on asphalt. This is an extra one. I appreciate it.
Hello, I'm good. How are you? I bet. I to drive you with a little food to make you comfortable for a little.
2 sheets of historic photos as part of the record.
Historic photos or historic drawings?
No, the photos that I.
I don't think we captured those. No.
Yeah, we did.
You did?
They got picked up.
Oh, good. Good.
Here's your fresh set. Walter, do you want a fresh set? Make sure.
Now we know.
How are you, Don? We'll shake that up a little bit, just so you know. Nothing is easy.
Okay, are we ready? Are you finished wrestling papers? Better question. Okay, next item on the agenda. agenda is item number 7. 2559 Puesta Del Sol. This is a concept-only review. No action may be taken. Project was last discussed on February 29th, 2012. This is a master plan for the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. If you could please introduce yourselves for the record and give us a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
Walter Schacht with Schacht Islani Architects.
Suzette Naylor, Thompson Naylor Architects.
Suzanne Elledge, Planning and Permitting Services.
Welcome all.
We'll jump right in. As my cover letter to you indicated that submitted the plans, we certainly welcomed your direction last time to proceed and go on to complete our Phase 2 HSSR and go on to formal concept review, and we are on that path. However, when we were with you before in February, we also heard that there were some commissioners' reservations about the plan, and the museum would like to have a greater level of confidence before proceeding with the greater investment of time and money into the set of plans that will need to be further developed in order for the Phase 2 report to be completed. And so there have been a series of explorations that the design team has taken to consider the response, the commissioner response that we received at the last meeting. And we want to share those with you and find out what you think. We will not be addressing landscape this time. There was a lot of consensus about the landscape plan at the previous meeting, so Susan Van Atta will join us at our next concept review with you. Today's presentation will be handled by Walter Schacht and Suzette Naylor. And I want to just underscore that I think it's a great thing for this community project that we have two architects partnering on this project. One who is an expert in museums and understands their programming needs and has accomplished quite a lot with museum design in his career, and Suzette, our own Suzette Naylor, who has a deep respect and understanding for EPV and the EPV guidelines and such experience with historic properties. So they're going to be sharing each of their own perspectives with respect to these explorations that we've taken in response to your comments. So we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to turn it over to Suzette.
Thank you. I'll just flip this over because that's the way I started. You will all remember this, of course, is the project that you saw on February 29th. And all the comments that came, 29 comments, I counted the last time I read them. And I'm sure you realize that we have been looking at those comments, trying to understand those comments, and in fact amalgamating our understanding of the comments from the joint HLC-PC meeting since 2 years ago. And in order for us to move forward and to do our explorations, we had to know that we understood what the comments meant. And I'm not going to read this because you've all had your packets, but we tried to explain what we thought the goals were of what you wanted us to achieve as we move forward. So I hope that these two comments here that do express what you think we should be trying to achieve as we move forward. And I would like, if during the comments, if you could express whether you felt we did encapsulate what you would wanted us to do, because if we're wrong, we need to know. The four things that we chose to explore as we move forward in these options are, as you saw here, embrace the Spanish colonial revival style, address the linear character of the composition, provide more variety in spatial sequences, and provide more variety in ridge heights. I'm going to, we don't need to, thank you, Phil. I know you've seen this diagram before, but I'm going to use it just as an example for something that I want to talk about. You've just been looking at the historic resource element, and the basic tenet for preservation is identify, protect, and preserve. And that is a lot of what we are trying to do here. So one of the things that you identified very clearly to us, and we understood, was that there is a charming picturesqueness and eccentricity to this site and to this building. And it's something that you wish us to remind ourselves as we go through. Well, in looking at this diagram of the current circulation, we feel that the eccentricity has not evolved into better functionality, but actually has devolved into something past anti-name and more into some problematic things, particularly in terms of how this site is accessed. And the museum wants it to be fully accessible. And I'm not even going to mention, but I will, the ADA requirements. So, one of the things we did when we decided to rehabilitate this site, and I mean the site, not just the buildings, was to say, have post-Hazeltine, who are here, say what is the historic structure, and that is identified here in white. And when you look at the circulation of the historic structure, which is what we should use as the springboard to move forward, it's quite direct, but it's quite magical. You come under and through, and then you're into encapsulated nature. How wonderful. You go through in a very direct circulatory route in either direction. But as you come out, you see nature. But then as you go in here, you're into encapsulated nature again, but it's been fossilized or it's been pinned to a board. So there's always these wonderful stories about nature and its history as you go through this very direct circulatory route. Well, in using that as a springboard, it is an antecedent. I need to get that right. An antecedent for how we want to approach what the circulation is on the rest of the site. We will not replicate it, but we will keep these things in mind. And it's not the eccentricity of what's happening now, but the historic part of it. In terms of
Stop moving the plans.
Oh, sorry. I keep moving it to myself. Because we want to rehabilitate the existing legacy structures, as you know, we're going to remove approximately 58,000 square feet, and we need to replace those functions. In terms of rehabbing the site, we're also identifying the natural resources, Mission Creek, its setback, and the oak woodlands. In rehabbing those, we're going to restore them and bring them back to life, so we are identifying, protecting, and preserving. We're applying this to every single thing that we can. So we're given our boundaries here and here, the street and the parking lot, for where we can place that 58,000 square feet. We're not only a historic structure of merit, but we are also in a particular, very special neighborhood of EPV. EPV2, as you all know, was initially generated because the mission was identified as a very important historic resource. In order to protect and preserve it, a neighborhood boundary was drawn around it, and our feeling is that any development in that area not only has to pay attention to its own buildings and its own site, but must pay attention to the protection and the preservation of the historicity of the mission. So that's always underlining what we're thinking about as well, and we're trying to stay within our context of understanding. One of the things I want to point out is, as you look at the institutional buildings that we're in relation to in this neighborhood, and that would be the Mission and St. Anthony's, and I'm sorry that St. Mary's and others are not on here, but this is the base map that I had. One thing that you notice, and there's a long history of both of these two institutions, that through man-made problems, natural disasters, and so on and so forth, and the need to grow over the years, that they looked at the functions they needed. They needed granaries, they needed water, they needed barracks, they needed all these things. And each time that function was accommodated by an incremental growth. If you look at the growth of either the Mission or the St. Anthony's, you notice that they grew in increments that are proportional to itself. Each of these footprints is talking about a proportionate incremental growth in a way that is particular to itself, yet they are compatible to each other at the time. They're also encapsulating nature within their courtyards, always using the outside with the inside. So our feeling is, if you look at our footprint, what we're trying to do is add incremental growth to the historic structure that we're going to reveal, and it's incrementally in units that are proportionate to the existing legacy building. And our own footprint is unique to our institution, just as these are there. So in terms of compatibility with the existing institutions in the neighborhood, we feel we're fairly compatible to ourselves and to the institutional neighborhood. The other part about the institutional neighbors is that they are buildings that serve the community. And being community buildings, they have footprints, they have volumes within which allow people to come gather. This is not a residence. People come, they have their weddings, they have their schools, they come to school plays, they come to gatherings, and we are providing places for school buses to come, schools to have camps, the astronomy club to be here in the main courtyard and to look up at the sky. So this is, again, a community building, and we're very aware of that.
No weddings, though.
No weddings. At least we don't know if there's going to be. That's in the future. The other thing I want to mention, is that in terms of three-dimensionality, once you bring up the scale of a footprint that large, you're not going to be like a residential scale. And there are signals that these community buildings have that are important to express both in the scale of ornamentation and the scale of elements of the buildings, like the tower at St. Anthony's or the facade of the Mission Church, that are going to be a different scale. They will not be residential. So we are compatible with them as well. In addition, if you look at these buildings, they are surrounded by defensive buffers of space and landscape in relation to their residential neighbors. And we are too. We are surrounded by a rather large parcel. And I am indebted to Tim Hazeltine for this idea, and I really thought it was wonderful. There's a way of being compatible that can be replicative and it can be similar, but in this sense, when you have a large institutional building with a residential nearby, there's a complementarity and a dynamic exchange between the two that can only happen because they are of different scale, yet similar. And I think we are wanting to do that. So in terms of compatibility with the residences as well as the institution in our neighborhood, we feel we are compatible by that kind of thinking. Thank you.
So we want to engage you in conversation about two different sets of issues to give us direction as we move forward with the detailed development of plans, sections, and elevations for the Phase 2 report. The footprint, and we've shown 3 alternate footprints that we've considered and hoping to get feedback on that, is obviously an important issue for us. But also important to us is the whole idea of what the massing of the buildings are and how the roofs are oriented relative to the historic buildings in the site. So the first little piece here that I'd like to discuss relates to this issue of the volumes and the roofs relative to the program of the exhibit galleries and the museum's goal for sustainable design. And hope we can keep that in mind when we look at the footprints as well. So we've shared with you in this image the original footprint for the Santa Barbara Gallery, which would be the new permanent exhibit gallery that the museum is building. This is the exhibit designer's plan. I think you've seen it before in a past presentation. The gallery itself is about 6,500 square feet, which is actually extremely small for a permanent collections gallery for a contemporary museum of natural history. But we feel that that's appropriate for the site. The current galleries run about 1,200 to 1,500 square feet, so this is about 3 or 4 times larger, but considerably smaller. Probably the smallest new permanent collections gallery that anybody would be building today would be about 10,000 square feet. So this is about 65% of that. And they're looking at a simple volume in plan. And the next page shows 2 alternative section diagrams. So the section at the bottom of the page illustrates what the exhibit designer and what we as the architects think would be ideal for the Santa Barbara Gallery, which would be a simple open volume with a gable over it. You see a couple of trusses. Then there's another volume for the Nature Observatory, and then you see the individual classrooms. Above that, we've drawn an alternative section because we've heard several times from commissioners that there's an interest in breaking up the volume of the gallery and having roofs run in the north-south direction as opposed to the east-west direction. So we've drawn that as well. And the difficulty for the museum, and these roofs are similar in width to the roofs that are on the historic buildings, is that we tend to subdivide this room into a set of volumes which are at the scale of the original building. And those rooms, which we're rehabilitating, are wonderful. And they are great for displaying the sense of natural history as it was originally conceived in the teens and 20s, even into the early 30s when those buildings were built. But our perception of natural history and the way in which we address it now is different. The next image, and again, you've seen this before, this is from an earlier plan, is the exhibit designer's interior perspective of the space based on the plan that you saw before. Now, the way that we would be looking at this today would actually be with a gable roof form over it, with the ridge of that roof running from one end of the page all the way through. We think that that would be a great space for this rather modest permanent collections exhibit. But this space wouldn't work as functioned if function as intended, if the gables began to run the other way and we subdivided this into 3 separate volumes of space. It really wants to work as one volume of space. So that's an important issue to discuss. Part and parcel with that issue is the issue of trying to maximize solar access. So, Suzette, you want to just address the broad principles?
Yeah, the broad principle is something I've said before, and I feel very strongly about. We all do. We feel lucky to be in this time and place at this part of the line after the approval of the general plan and its sustainability framework. And I feel that the people are in place here at the HLC, the agencies, the people who approve the general plan. They're all ready to move forward using that sustainability framework. And we have a client and a team that really wants to go forward on that. So I never use the word precedent in my talking about the previous buildings or any of our neighbors, because what I would really like to underline is that if we could all go forward together and make this a precedent for the general plan to refer to, this is how you may do a sustainable building in EPV, that would be great.
So the first drawing that we're looking at is the roof plan of the buildings based on the presentation we made in February. And we understand the concern about linearity, and our understanding is that the comments about linearity aren't just about the plan, they also apply to the way the roofs are oriented. At that time, sorry, Phil. Originally, the plans that we showed when we went in front of the Planning Commission and HLC in 2010 and 2011 had enough solar panels on them to affect an 18% reduction in energy use in the buildings. When we were here in February, because we had changed from the original assembly to gabled roofs with tile on them and so forth, we had reduced our ability to harness the energy of the sun to about 11.4% energy reduction. And now there's a bunch of different ways to look at this, and we want to take a look at how that affects the volume of the galleries and our ability to be sustainable. So you're seeing a different site plan here. This is one of the 3 alternates that we'll talk about in terms of revised building footprints. It's not the only one, but we chose this one to show a series of roof alternates on for discussion's sake. So one way in which we could break up the volume of the Santa Barbara Gallery is to put dormers on the north side of this volume. Tends to break up the space inside, not ideal in terms of exhibits, and that and a number of other moves that we've made in the plan to try and break up the linearity, we've lost more of our ability to access the energy of the sun through solar panels. Here's another alternate, which actually has a series of gables that run north-south on the Santa Barbara Gallery. This breaks up the space inside the gallery even more. You can see if you look from here to here the scale relationship to the historic buildings. And again, there's a reduction in our ability to be sustainable and to achieve our goals for that. And then finally, here's an alternate which has a revised footprint, which we'll discuss with you here in a minute, but maintains a volume over the Santa Barbara Gallery that really works for exhibit design and maximizes our ability to put PVs on the roof. We're still continuing to lose. I mean, we had this 18% reduction in energy usage that we started at. Now we're down to a little bit less than 10%. So that's a fairly substantial loss, but obviously respecting the EPV guidelines, critical part of what we're doing in designing the buildings. But we're looking to find a balance between these issues. So finally, we have 3 alternate floor plans that we'd like to share with you.
I don't think I need to add more than that.
The only thing I want to say on this one, this is where we were on the 29th. We're going to look at those 3 floor plans, footprints. They're not mutually exclusive, obviously. The programmatic relationships of where the basic elements are similar in all the plans. It's more of the way in which we've shaped the buildings to shape the outdoor spaces and the sequence of movement. So certainly we can talk about components of one plan that seem to be desirable being added to components of another plan. So.
Are they going to serve alcohol in this visitor bar?
You can ask.
That's an interesting question. We'll refer that for future debate.
Maybe I'll condition it.
Okay. One last thing before we look at the floor plans. Again, the site constraints in terms of the environmental setbacks and the height limitations are important. So we want to put this plan together to show the constraints of the setbacks and also point out that on the west end of our site, it's important for us to get daylight for the offices in the lower level of the Collections and Research Center. But also, the bottom of the page, we did go back and revisit the comments that we heard about gaining more variation in the ridge heights of the buildings. And honestly, we're not sure what we can really do about that. We have pushed the lower volumes down to the point where we barely have 10 feet clear inside the volumes, which is what we need for labs, offices, libraries, and other functional spaces. And actually, the upper floor of the library is underneath 10-foot clear. It's down to about 9 feet. So we're really squeezed, pushing down. And whoop, in terms of going up, we're showing the 30-foot height limit. We did have a discussion among ourselves about the possibility of looking at a variance for the height limit in terms of getting variation by pushing some of the roof heights up beyond that. And here's our concern. And again, we're pointing this out for the sake of your discussion. All along, we've worked on the premise of keeping the height of all the buildings below the ridgeline of Fleischmann. And you can see that here. Now, we don't know that we can get a variance, but certainly we can try and pursue one. But a question that we have for the Commission is, we've gotten positive comments about the fact that we've allowed Fleischmann to remain the highest volume on the site. It kind of sets a nice relationship up for the historic buildings. So do we want to violate that? That's been one of our basic sort of design rules all along. So if we were to go for a variance and get it, then we would have to face the fact that Fleischmann would no longer be the tallest volume on the site. Okay. So for sake of discussion, 3 alternative plans. And I'm going to talk really briefly here about what we've tried to do. So on the west end of the site, the last time we presented, concern was expressed about the linear character of the space, which ran all the way through from east to west. And so we've shifted the building volumes so that now there's a significant jog as we move, I should say from north to south, excuse me. As we move from the north, the courtyard and the admin building, we've basically broken that axis through there along the lines of what we heard would be desirable. We've also wanted to look at how we might create a jog in the axis that runs east to west. So we've manipulated the space between the Tempex Gallery and the Santa Barbara Gallery to create a jog in there. This move that's on the west end of the site from north to south we think works great. And interested in your comments on that, but that works really well. This first move that we've made through the center here we think is somewhat less desirable because although it creates a jog, the space doesn't really have the courtyard character that we hoped for originally. So we hope that one of our other plan changes speaks to that more effectively, but you'll tell us. And then the other issue that we addressed here was the massing. So what we've done is pulled the Nature Observatory away, reconfigured the classrooms, and moved elements that were part of this assembly into the Santa Barbara Gallery so that the Nature Observatory and the classrooms become more of a little jewel here at the connection between the historic buildings, the creek, and the new buildings.
Here in option B, you'll see that we've made a few changes here. And every time you make a change, as Walter said, there are some benefits and disadvantages to everything. We've retained this north-south jog in the axis here to retain the interest and not have a bowling alley of any kind there to reach the creek. But we've also separated the Nature Observatory and the Santa Barbara Gallery. This is not ideal because you do want to have exchange between the two. But in terms of providing a view to the creek or allowing the breezes to come through, this might be ideal. And it also breaks this into a smaller piece. So there's a benefit to that. In putting this together like this, it has some interesting benefits. It allows adjacency of the galleries, which is desirable. It also somewhat breaks the feeling of linearity, we believe, by providing sort of a wall to that courtyard feeling of coming through. However, by doing that, by making them so close, you require a higher level of fire-resistant construction, and that really puts us into a much higher budget than we had hoped. So, as Walter had said, please remember that you may have noticed that the Maximus Gallery moved around and all that sort of business, but that some of these things can be hybridized. So continue to see it as possibilities as opposed to fixed in place.
So two more issues here. Actually, from a programmatic point of view, there's some advantage to this because once you get into the gallery assembly, you can move around continuously, which is an advantage. But the central building is more massive here. But the thing we miss the most about this one is that we have this whole idea of the water moving through the site being part of the wayfinding and part of the experience of the site. And A and C allowed that to continue to happen. I think we got very positive comments about that previously. And here, because we have this volume in the middle of the site, we're not able to do that.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in about 4 minutes, please.
We'll do it in 3.
Okay.
I need one.
The last alternate is option C. So again, we're making this change and bumping the movement from the north to the south on the west side of the site. We're trying to learn a little bit in the middle of the site from option B. So we still allow this to be outdoor space, but we really pinch it down so that what we really did after we looked at option B is we came back to this and said, well, maybe we can really pinch this space down and make it an interior courtyard so that there is a stronger sequence of spaces moving from the primary plaza through the courtyard out to the woodlands. So it does that, but still it's an outdoor space so the water flows through. And then here, we've heard a number of times requests to try turning an element of the building, and a couple times the classrooms were suggested. So we've rotated the classrooms, and we think that's potentially quite nice because it gives the classrooms a great view across. This is kind of the primary view of the creek. It tweaks the plan at the exact point that new and old come together, which seems to be an appropriate place to make that change. So I would say that as far as the museum's master planning committee goes, this is actually right now their preferred scheme, option C, just so you know.
Okay.
You're done?
When we return to you next time, after hearing your comments today, after hearing your comments,
food, that's fine.
we will have our Phase 2 report in hand, and we'll have a revised set of plans. And we will be asking you to complete your compatibility analysis. That's the step in the process that we will be. We have to have you do that as part of your requirements. We have to have you complete that analysis before we can begin the formal application process. So we're really hoping that today you will provide us with specific comments about how we can get to that milestone. I'd like you to know, for what it's worth, this matrix that I have sitting in front of me is our own team's summary of every one of the guidelines, not just the compatibility guidelines in the EPV guidelines, but each one of the guidelines, the design guidelines. And our design team has done their own analysis to ensure that we are compatible. So Walter, Suzette, and Susan Van Atta, along with post-Hazeltine, we've gone through that. And when we come back with revised plans to you, I would be happy to submit this if you think it would be of use. You know, it's our take on it, but you might find it useful, and we'd be happy to submit it when we come back. I also just want to say that
30 seconds.
Okay. I'll make it quick. We tend to get very focused on buildings and plans and regulatory requirements, but I don't want us to forget what the museum is. And I have this stack of letters from children who have gone to the museum on field trips, and they write the museum to thank them about their experience. And maybe if we've got time at the end, I'll read from this letter. I think it's a heartwarming reminder of what the museum, why we're all here, why we're here trying to improve the museum and what its mission is. So at the end, perhaps I can do that. I don't want to take up your time now. There was a question, I just want to clear something up. You guys said something about weddings. As we know, the museum serves the community in many ways, and there are many community meetings, voting happens, the Mission Canyon Association happens, and indeed weddings do happen at the museum, and they are continued to propose. So, I mean, they are proposed to continue.
Yes.
So I just wanted to.
Propose all you want, but it doesn't mean you're getting married.
So I just wanted to clear that up in case there was a misunderstanding.
Always ask her for those things.
How about the bar? What's going on with that? That's
We
what I'm
will revisit
anxious
that later, I
to
know. I've wondered about that nomenclature.
Okay, all finished?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Staff, do you have anything you want to add? No? Okay. I will open public comment. Having no speaker slips, I will close public comment. Move on to questions from the commission. Commissioner Drury, do you have any questions of the applicant? Okay. Commissioner Boucher? How about Commissioner Sharp?
Not yet.
Okay. How about Commissioner Murray? Questions? Write it down. Okay. I'm going to continue the sequence. Commissioner Lavoie, none. Commissioner Arias, any questions?
With the proposal C, which you say is your top priority right now, how does that work with the energy capacity?
So that all depends on where we end up with the orientation of the roofs. So if we can, and for which the Santa Barbara Gallery is really the biggest issue, so if we can maintain the orientation that was shown, because we used C as the underlay for those roof plans. There we are.
That's it there.
So we're just under 10%.
Under 10. Thank you. Your turn.
Oh.
Sorry, it's good to sneeze.
It's quite all right. So, not too many questions. First question is on the Maximus Gallery. Is it programmatically required to be attached to the Santa Barbara Gallery?
It isn't programmatically required. Actually, previously, the last plans we showed, it was actually attached to the library. However...
Where's that? I'm sorry. Looking at C.
So it was... One of the things we didn't mention that's substantially different is we've actually made a program reduction in the building that's on the west end of the site. You remember last time the library building actually bridged out over the road.
Yes.
We pulled it back. So we've reduced the program there, and the feeling is that if Maximus continued to be part of that volume, which is where it was the last time we showed it to you, nobody ever visited it. It's so remote. So the feeling, and Maximus actually struggles a little bit right now because it's remote from the rest of the museum. So the feeling is that making it part of the Santa Barbara Gallery offers it an opportunity to be part of the regular visitor experience. And there are opportunities for the print collection that's displayed in Maximus to be illustrative of the concepts that are being interpreted in the Santa Barbara Gallery. So it's advantageous.
Okay. I was asking because I was looking at the north-south cross-axis and the potential that it had.
That's a
towards
comment.
That's true. I was following up on my
Commissioner
question.
Drury, any questions?
Yes.
I might have had another.
The square footage of the Santa Barbara Gallery is 6,500
square feet. By way of comparison, how big is the square footage of the bird habitat hall?
I think the bird hall is 3,500. It's about 3,500.
3,500. Thank you.
Okay.
That's my question.
Any commissioners have any other questions? I do have one question I can think of right now. You explained that this north-south axis felt sort of circuitous and broken up to you. I see it a little bit differently because I see that I can go right through here without having to go here. But it's this edge here that is giving me that strong axis. I guess, is there a possibility to either maybe landscape that or do something there so that that has to happen?
So the
You
little,
understand what I'm
correct,
saying?
and so the little crosshair that's in the plan is indication of a fountain.
But I figured.
Or an architectural element which would force you out and around.
Only if it connected to their
Well, yeah,
block
we
there.
actually, that's true. This is actually a portico, which provides a secondary entry into 10X.
I think I'd want you to look at that, though, because that doesn't break up, it doesn't give you that circuitous circulation, if I can call it that.
Okay. Yes.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Murray.
So, yeah, we're looking at this sheet. Yeah. So, what is the distance between this? Let's say, I mean, if you're coming down here, how many feet? What are we talking about? What's the width of this opening?
So what is the width?
The width?
Yeah.
It's probably about 10 feet. It's very narrow. I'd say 10 to 12 feet.
And how about here?
Those are right at 20 feet, because once they get closer than 20 feet, then it all becomes one building, and we have a problem with our...
Yeah.
For me, if you're thinking about it being a paseo or that sort of thing, I think 10 is your minimum for a paseo, and these are one story here. So we've tried to be mindful of the proportion. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Yes. Great.
Chair, thank you.
Wonderful.
Won't be long. I wanted to pursue this question that you brought up because right when you said it, I was questioning this myself, and I understand the respect to Fleischmann in terms of height. But in terms of the question of the zoning variance, I'm kind of curious to know what kind of consideration you're given that. But the other thing I wanted to know is maybe looking at a precedent for a zoning variance would be looking at the other buildings in EPV2, and if you have a sense of how tall those buildings are, obviously leaving out the tower at St. Anthony's, but what are the heights of those buildings, and could we be looking at them as precedents for considering a zoning variance here?
So I think let me do a two-part answer, and I'll speak to the other buildings, and then maybe Suzanne can speak to land use, which you've explored. I can't tell you what the height of the other buildings are per se, in terms of actual numbers, but I'll tell you that they're all considerably taller. So if we look at just the front facade of the Mission and forget about the cathedral component of it, you're looking at 2 stories over an arcade with a gable roof over that, and I'm betting that volume that you see coming up is probably 40, 45 feet. And if you look at St. Anthony's, which I actually know better for a variety of reasons, you're looking at 4-story buildings. And so we are tiny in comparison.
I guess just to throw in the other thing that we would have to grapple with is if we did want the team to go with a variance, we would sort of lose that hierarchy of Fleischmann.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So then the next question, my follow-up question would be, again, if one were to pursue that, and you were looking for variations of the roof lines to respond to that comment that you've heard from the commission, what do you think the heights would need to be? How much taller would this building need to be than Fleischmann, for instance, in order to...
Well, that's a good question. It hasn't been studied. I should say that our theory about Fleischmann has kind of dictated all this, along with the fact that the land use code keeps it all lower anyway. But from a spatial point of view, it'd be a huge advantage inside these buildings. If we were to look at the building sections, which we've had previously but we don't have today, it's really dicey inside some of these spaces, particularly when you're looking at fire protection systems and ductwork and so forth. We have a strategy for how to make it work, but it's not conventional. And then actually the exhibit volumes are very, very low compared to what you would expect. So there would be, you have to wrestle with Fleischmann, and we don't know what we can do with land use, and I'll let Suzanne speak to that. But if we take those 2 pieces out of it, would it be advantageous on top of just being able to create more variation to get the volume? Yeah, it'd be a big advantage.
Okay. Quickly.
If you can avoid making a request for a variance in height, it would be best. It's our community is sensitive to it, and the regulations say what they say for a reason. However, there's a process to change that when circumstances warrant. And so if we were to hear that indeed, because of the topography and all of the other considerations, it is worth adding another foot or so to these buildings so that we could have that flexibility, then we would,
You need
or...
6 to 8 feet.
Okay. Oh, okay.
If you want to get anything out of it that's perceptible, you need 6 to 8 feet.
All right. So
Notice how to do it.
if that were the direction, then we would seriously explore it.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Jury. Question.
Because it's been brought up so often, what is the visitor bar?
That's where you go to get a
Not
drink.
that we're suggesting going, having a drink or anything.
But only visitors.
It's visitor services, and it includes the entry, the store. There's a very small snack location in there. It also includes storage areas, restrooms, and the planetarium.
Do you have a square footage for that right off, approximately?
I'm going to guess that all in, it's about 7 or 8. This, from here to here, not including temp X, is probably about 7,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
But that's a guess.
Okay.
Because Fleischman is...
Yes, Commissioner Lavoie, question.
What's going to happen in the Legacy building?
So the legacy buildings are going to be rehabilitated, and
they're going to remain exhibit spaces.
they're going to remain exhibits. Well, they're going to remain exhibit spaces. Actually, some spaces which have been obscured and modified. For example, around the central courtyard, all the spaces around the perimeter of that courtyard were once contiguously connected. They're no longer connected that way. They're going to be opened up and be connected again. But basically, you're talking about everything is going to be gallery space, with the addition of the fact that the library will serve as both an interpretive as well as an assembly space.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. Can you explain graphically what the differences in your coloring is? I pretty much get that these are solar panels. Not quite sure I'm getting what that is, or maybe I'm
That's
completely
solar. So
wrong.
anything that's green is solar.
Okay, then what is this?
Skylights.
Skylights, gotcha. Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Okay, we're going to go into comments, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to have the commissioner provide a comment, and then have the applicant team respond to that comment and get a little bit more of a dialogue going on, rather than just comment and then move on to the next. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Winnick. And there's no passing. Do not pass, go.
No worries. As you've noticed, I'm not afraid to speak on this one, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, and I know this is an anathema, or the thing of pursuing the zoning issue and asking to study that, but I do personally feel it's worth studying. My feeling is, and I also understand the balance where we don't want to overshadow or overpower Fleischman, but my feeling is if the community is going to build the building that is going to be as prominent as the historical museum is, that's one of those times when you might look at the zoning. For instance, the Mission, St. Anthony's, the Granada, the courthouse. There's a lot of precedents for buildings in town that, in fact, are taller than their neighbors. And obviously the Granada is a little exaggerated. But there you go. Please don't come back with a Granada. No, but the point is they're prominent buildings in the community. And I feel the Natural History Museum should be a prominent building. Obviously, we don't want it to be insensitive to its neighbors. There are buffer zones. So I would propose, let's make these the best buildings they can possibly be. So I would encourage that. I also like the idea that it would give more variation. In terms of the schemes put in front of us, I do prefer Scheme C. I think the rotated classrooms is a benefit, their relationship to the towards the creek. I also like the fact that they give a little more breathing space between them and Fleischman, and that by turning them, you do feel a difference between the new and the old. It sort of makes me wonder if maybe the visitor bar might be able to be backed off a little bit and not be quite so close to Fleischman. That seems a little bit too tight. You can see that, yeah, it's up on the screen.
Here?
Yeah. It would be nice if there was a little more breathing space there. I also prefer C in terms of the east-west axis, simply because I thought it was too hiddly-piggly, the alternative, and B seems awfully massive to me, but even A didn't seem successful. I kind of like the idea of Maximus being connected, although I understand programmatically it may not be ideal. But again, I like getting vistas through the site, so if the Maximus Gallery were to connect to the building that formerly had the library, I think that would be nice, even though I understand programmatically that may not be ideal. I think it would be nice to have that vista through. I don't really have a big opinion about the sustainability. I think, I mean, obviously we always want to be sustainable. I think getting the architecture right and the buildings fitting into the environment perhaps is overriding. I still like the idea of the roof planes being varied. Perhaps if we got the additional height, maybe the gables running the other direction actually would still work, that you could get your galleries to feel like it's one large space. I don't like the plan, though. I will tell you that the gables stop short. There seems to be a funny, I should have asked the question, I didn't. There seems to be a, I can't seem to find that roof.
You're on Alt 3? Is
I'm
that
not
what you're
sure.
looking for?
Yeah, I don't understand why the gables don't make it to the end of the building on two of them. The third gable goes all the way. So, and I'll end my comment.
Which one are you on? I'm sorry. Which Alt are you on? Alt 2.
The Alt 2, you're right, C2. So I understand, you know, I'm not quite sure if I understand the architecture, but I understand the idea that it's three gables in a row. I'm not quite sure why they stop short. And I'll stop there. I'm sure the other commissioners need some time too, and you certainly can answer any of those questions.
Okay.
Or
Any
comments.
cogent responses by the applicant team?
Well, just an answer to the question. The reason they could run through. The reason they stopped short is there's actually a line of structure right there, and then display cases at either end that allow that to happen. And there was originally, and probably still would be, an arcade across the front of them, so the arcade has a flat roof on it. I think the comment, I'll make a comment on a comment. The comment about moving Maximus back across to the west is interesting because the reason, we moved it over here, it's advantageous programmatically, but the major reason for moving that is that we heard negative comments about being able to see all the way through. So now we're getting now we're hearing a positive comment about it, so some synthesis at the end would provide helpful direction to the design team.
Phil's not looking forward to that.
That seems like a reasonable request.
Better take notes.
Maybe we'll have to.
Really?
You want more paper?
Touche.
Maybe
Do you
we'll
want
end
more
up going to
paper?
the visitor bar.
Oh, dear. No, I got it, I think. Thank you, though. I resign. Okay. That's all your comments. Commissioner Arias, any comments?
I would be very concerned about you going for a variance. There are very specific findings that have to be made for a variance. And I think the surrounding neighbors might be very concerned about that precedent being set for that area.
Commissioner, microphone.
The buildings that were cited in your conversation, many of them were built before the height regulations came in. And so they don't really fall under that, and many of them would probably not be approved today. So I think a variance is a very serious step that I would look at very carefully because, as I say, there are very serious conditions and findings that have to be made on it. I like the idea that you've moved the classroom closer to the creek. I think that's an incentive for children in the classroom to look out and see more of nature and things like that. For me, the appearance of the buildings and their relationship to the people walking by as they go from one building to another is what's going to make this a pleasant walk or a walk down an alley of straight walls. And so, to me, looking at those details in the designs of the buildings really tempers how I feel about how the buildings will work in this design that you proposed. Some of the things you say I agree with, some of them, as I say, I don't agree with. And, yeah, thanks. You can continue to live.
We can sit next to
Maybe. I would like to see this to be very, very special, and sometimes I think instead of the alley expression, or which is rather detrimental to your design, and I apologize for that, but the going through, say, a street in Spain, in Granada, or along there where the buildings curve in and out and there's details on the buildings, make them much more able to be related to as people, and friendly structures. That's about it. I just would not want to see, I would like to see you work within the zoning. This is a residential zone, and as such, I think that should be somewhat respected.
Okay. Any
No.
comments back to that? Okay. Commissioner Lavoie, comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can appreciate the complexity of a program for this museum as being sort of like trying to squeeze an elephant in a shoebox. I can understand the great amount of work that you have put into this project so far. I'm familiar with the design process. And you're at that point where you need to take all of the bumwad on your desk, crumple it up, throw it on the floor, take a deep breath, walk through some of our buildings, walk through the courthouse, walk through the mission, walk through this museum, and try to understand why we're all in love with this museum. You're going to get 9 opinions as what to do with it, but we're sort of unanimous in what we like about it. It's our museum. It is unique to Santa Barbara. It is like no other museum in the country or in the world. It's crammed into a building more suited to a monastic order than it is a museum. You won't find that anyplace else but Santa Barbara. And the experience of that building, it's sort of like the inside matches the outside. The spaces are unique to Spanish architecture. All of our good buildings, the insides match the outsides. They aren't just frosting on a shoebox. And that's what we like about our buildings, our best buildings. It's about how you compose a building. That very old Moorish concept of containing a garden within 4 walls, and you compose your buildings in a series of courtyards. And if you look at our large buildings, they are mostly composed around courtyards in one form or another. El Paseo is even composed around a courtyard replicating a village. And we've learned over the years that if you've got a big building, treat it like a big building. Don't try to make a village out of it, because it's still going to be a big building. Particularly if it's an institutional building, it needs to be composed like a building is composed. So sort of like having this angst about, how many roofs can I create? No. Maybe it needs to be a huge basilica roof sitting on the gallery rather than trying to break it up in 5,000 pieces. It's a big building. Build it like a big building. Build it to look like a church. That's what the big buildings look like. And so, it's the unique experience. I mean, I pulled out the plan that you have with the circulation plan. And that's one of the things I love about going to this museum. I get lost every time I go there. I find something new that I hadn't seen before. I walk down a dead end and I think, oh, what's this stuff? And I go look at it. And I'm one of those people who, I did the Metropolitan Museum in a half an hour because I stood at the front door and I would see this, 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 and this, and I zipped through. I'm unable to do that in this museum. Totally unable. And because of that, have probably spent more time here than I spent at the Met. Because of the complexity of it. That's a wonderful thing. the scale of it. And if I'm not marveling at the architecture, I'm marveling at the exhibits. As hokey as they may seem by modern standards, they are still wonderful. They're tactile, they're hands-on, they're unique. And if you show me a gallery space, like the one picture done by a display guy, it's sort of like
this one here.
That one, thank you. How is this different from Costco? Really, how different is it from Costco? You've got stuff in racks. You've got this flat open beam roof that could be an industrial space. Go look at your current museum. The spaces are really quite wonderful. They don't have to be elaborate, but they're wonderful. They're amazing. That's what we want.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No response?
No response? Okay. Commissioner Murray, comments?
I think we should stay in the 30 feet height. Because this is in a neighborhood and it's different. It's different from the Mission or the other big institutions. And also, the historic building, the legacy building, is really what you have to be compatible with. So I'm thinking if it's going to be higher, I think it will be a problem for me. I think this option C, I like the openings of the paseos and, you know, being able to have a light and sense of the creek. But I do agree with Bill Lavoie in some ways of the sort of the something about the scale, the inside scale of this that I wish could be found here. For example, this courtyard here, inside here, could it be found in one of the buildings here and be incorporated instead of, you know, maybe this. I do like this opening, but I'm just thinking, is there a way where the architecture could be manipulated a little bit more to give you that sort of sense when you're inside the building? It's a more intimate exhibit sense that you find here. Because, you know, when you go in here, you come into this little courtyard, and it's great that you're going to peel off all those buildings, so then you have the connector. And I think that's the kind of feeling that if we could find here. I also agree with Bill that if you're going to have one bold building, then let it be one bold building. And I think I would like to say that in your mind, you're going to have to show me among the new buildings, what's the hierarchy? We have the Fleischman here, who is going to be sort of the leader of the whole entire campus. But let's say within the new campus, this part here, what is the hierarchy of the building where I'm kind of come in and I say, okay, that's the main key core, and what I'm going to find around here, and what is that experience like? And what is that experience in relation to the legacy buildings? I do like this nature observatory here, and this part in the classroom I think really is good because it just so relates well to the Fleischman, its size, its sort of its setting. I think the buildings that I have the most problematics with are this building, this building here.
Visitor bar and Temp-X.
The Temp-X and the visitor. I just have no sense of how that visitor building, this long linear building like this, and how it would relate to this. I'm just saying this, but I really. So I guess if you think, okay, I'm coming to this new campus, what is that main sort of thing that will rise my emotions, and I'm coming through here, and then the rest are sort of organized along that, and from there they're all compatible with the Fleischmann without mimicking all that. Also, I also agree with Bill's comments that I think in this building where there are a series of gable roofs works because it's actually a smaller building. But you come to the 7,000 square feet building, I don't know if a series of small roofs would be like a too many storefronts, you know what I mean? Because if you look at the Mission, you got the cathedral, and then you have this long, long roof that just not much adorned, just goes by, and I don't know how you're going. So it's that sense that, you know, you got the cathedral there, and then there's calm, and that's what I'm looking for in the project.
Is it?
The administration building, yeah, see, that sort of works, because to me it looks like this, and here it sort of complements this. So I see that just on plan. I say, oh, well, there's a sense of bookend. So I think I'm okay with that. It's really these three buildings that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Sharp. Oh, I'm sorry, rebuttal.
Yeah. It's not a rebuttal.
Discussion.
It's a few observations to share.
Yes.
So I think Commissioner Rios made a very important comment a little earlier when she said, you know, we're just looking at a plan drawing, and the three-dimensional articulation of that tells us to some extent, it's not all about manipulating the footprint. And we're doing this one little step here because we thought there were some issues that really should be addressed with the commission before we came back. But there's a lot that goes on in these buildings that I think will answer Commissioner Murray's questions. I do have to say, on behalf of the experts, who are not at the table today, but the client, who is the expert above all of us, my experience with museum architects and everybody else, that these are the scales of spaces that are necessary for the museum to serve its audience and to do its job. And I think it's important that we understand that. Two brief observations, and I'll be done. One is that what I think will be delightful will be the contrast between the intimacy of these spaces and their character, which is of the teens and the 20s and the early 30s, and these spaces, which, although perhaps large compared to this, are still tiny compared to what anybody would be building for contemporary exhibit galleries today. So I think that contrast is appropriate, and I think that our historians have spoken with us about that, and I think you'll see some of that when we write the Phase 2 report. Last comment, and by the way, the volume of space inside of these two is envisioned, it's going to be gabled. It's not what you saw here. I think I mentioned that we're going to have gables and trusses over that space, much as Fleischmann does. If anything, Fleischmann is more the model than these are. But the other brief thing I'll say is that these buildings are tucked inside of other buildings on campus. So you see a little bit of a facade here. The Butterfly Pavilion captures this. So your sense of them as really large buildings on campus, you're really going to actually experience them as interior volumes. And we're able to segment and scale down. But I do appreciate the comments that both Commissioner Lavoie and Commissioner Murray said about going with the big roofs that reflect the program that's inside. I think it's very important to us. We appreciate that because we think that that's the appropriate way to do it ourselves. We just wanted to get the feedback on that idea.
I have a question. I'm not meaning to put you on the spot or anything, sometimes it just comes out weird, but in what way do you find the contrast between these larger exhibits and these smaller, more quaint exhibits delightful? Can you just elaborate on that for me?
Well, I think all of us have been in towns, cities, villages where historic buildings and newer buildings sit side by side. We see it in downtown Santa Barbara, and the courthouse would be a great example. I mean, it's hugely out of scale with its surroundings, but that change in scale, not just the outside, but actually the volumes of space inside of it.
It's delightful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's the kind of spatial and architectural diversity, even though it all fits within a singular design vernacular.
It's delightfully
that creates
diverse.
richness. Yeah.
Delightfully diverse.
Yeah.
Mr. Sharp, comments?
Thank you. Quickly here. I know the program, the relationship of spaces, square footage, site plan is very important, but my experience has been when you design a project like this, in Spanish colonial revival in particular, the exterior wags the interior. And I think we've beaten this thing to death and really should now start to work on the outside and romance your way through this project. It's going to change the footprint. It's going to change your relationship to the buildings, because it must. It is more important than 10 feet, 20 feet, and all of that. And as you start working your way through and imagining yourself at quarter-inch scale, 8-inch scale, walking through this thing, it will evolve automatically and solve a lot of these problems and be the end result in lieu of just looking at a plan like this. And that's my own personal experience. It's, and I don't know how you can design a site plan as much as you have and gone over it and over it and over it without having done end elevations and employed all knowledge you have now on Spanish colonial revival architecture. So I would recommend that you just start walking through, sketching exteriors. It will define the roof for you, because you'll see a gable, and you wouldn't want another gable alongside. I think the three gables has nothing to do with Spanish colonial revival architecture, in my opinion. And that you've really got to get it down into it and walk through this thing and start imagining what the exteriors are going to look like.
Yep. No. Yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Great. Commissioner Boucher, comments?
Well, as I mentioned before, I've been going to this museum since I was a very small child, and I'm sure you have too. And there's a word I like very much, and it's called serendipity. And this building has it. You go around a corner and you find something unexpected. You turn a corner over here and there's something unexpected. This, I hope that can happen over here too.
Good comment. Okay. Commissioner Drury.
My first comment is that I think that the visitor bar is too far from the heritage buildings. I think that they would tend to be forgotten in the flow. I think people will go through.
The entrances now.
Well, that's not yet. And I think that needs to be somehow. I would hate to see the heritage buildings become an afterthought or a footnote. And I don't know how architectural intimacy is achieved, not being an architect, but it's a rare thing when it happens, and the museum as it exists is full of it. And the third comment is that I'm really glad that Commissioner Lavoie did not leave at 6 o'clock.
6:30. His hall pass.
It said 6:30. I'm glad he did not leave, and I agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Lavoie and Commissioner Sharp. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not going to make any comments. So there's nothing.
Nothing to add, or
nothing for me to add.
But I'd like to sort of know what you think, if you
No,
don't
you don't.
mind. No. Oh dear.
No, you don't.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Lavoie.
I may be the only one, but I would support a height variance, particularly for
Okay, I
the
need to
nature-
take a straw. That was one of my. I need to take a straw vote on that. So. Okay.
I think it's important for
Okay.
the major gallery to pierce that
Envelope. That
envelope.
Okay. So I actually have 3 straw votes that I wanted to take, and I was directed by staff to do so. Who supports a height variance? We have 1, 2, 3, I think I could support one. So 4 in support of a height.
I could. It may not be necessary.
Yeah.
But
We have 5 then. 5 in support. Boucher, Arias, and Murray are opposed. Okay?
Let me say that I'm opposed for now because I don't see it. But once if it came, somebody picture came and it was really good. And
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
open to it, but I don't want to vote on it.
And I think, well, we're just asking for support of it. You know, I think if just this one building had a height variance, it's away from the neighbors. It's, you know, all the concerns that I heard by people. So I think there's room for that, but we're not going to say that, oh, you know, just because we set a height variance, that we want all of these or some of these, you know, more sensitive ones to be of volume.
Mr. Chair, can I
Yes.
just, the terminology would be could support.
Could support.
Could then
Okay,
we've got
so
more
so
time.
we'll take another vote. How many people could support a height variance? So we have the majority. The 2 that are dissenting are Boucher and Arias. Okay.
Mr.
So,
Chair.
yes.
I'd like to ask Mr. Cato, who's the planner, if he has any comments on that.
Mr. Cato.
You know, when I first heard the word variance, there is a provision for the variance in the code. The one thing that strikes me as difficult, even more difficult, is that there's a charter limitation on height. And
Yes.
there seems like there's 2 ways to go about that. One is a charter amendment, which would be a vote of the people. The other would be perhaps a specific plan or a rezone of some type. We haven't looked at this, so
Okay.
there may be other methods. But
I think the commission in general could support it, but it's up to the applicant to pursue it and to see if it can happen. We're not saying that it has to happen. We're just suggesting it. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Arias?
I went to work at 5 a.m. this morning, and I am tired.
Okay.
It is now 7. I've got to excuse myself.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Very well. Then my next question is the north-south view corridor versus a sort of meandering, more organic block to use. Because I think Mr. Scheck had a bit of a problem with what we directed them to last time and where he is now. So
We're
guess,
okay with either one. We just like some clarity about it.
Yes. Okay. So to phrase the question for a straw vote, who feels that the north-south view corridor is imperative on the west end of the site? The view corridor.
Meaning straight.
In other words, as
Imperative,
illustrated,
yeah.
it's illustrated, the option is illustrated. The original plan had a view corridor from north to south.
Right there.
All
So
the plans
do you
we
feel
looked at today bump the axis.
Do you
for
feel
lack of
that's
a better word.
imperative to have that view corridor?
No, I don't think it's imperative. For me, it's desirable.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
it's different than imperative.
Well, but you have to phrase a straw vote very
Okay.
definitively.
Okay.
So
So imperative, I would vote no, because I like to give designers.
I don't like either one.
Then you can still vote against it.
No, I agree with you.
My issue is with the building composition, not the views.
I agree with-
I think the view should be created from inside to outside.
Yeah.
Yes, in some form. But I think the building composition is a series of Paseos is flawed, seriously flawed.
Okay, but is it flawed because you don't have the view corridor?
No.
Or, okay. It's not flawed because of that. No. I don't know if we're giving you any more clarity. I don't know if I
You're
can.
not. Well, can I just?
I could just.
Can we just get, without committing to the plan overall?
Right.
Is there a preference between this western access from north to south, between option C and the February 29th plan, which gives you the view from, the idea here was you could look at the mountains in one direction, turn around and see the creek in the other, and see the woodlands on the third axis. So this kind of became 100% viewpoint. But we heard, when we showed that perspective, Commissioner Sharp said that's not working for him. So we said, okay, let's try it differently. And here you have to move through that sequence of spaces to see all three views.
Put it this way, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to float this this boat. I think it is preferable to have this more organic pathway, but it's also desirable to have a view corridor. Can I have my cake and eat it too? No, and let me tell you how. Let me tell you how.
I build the building twice.
No, let me tell you how you're going to accomplish that. Like I was talking about earlier, instead of necessarily the building projecting out into here, maybe it's landscape, and it's interrupting that pedestrian pathway, but it's maintaining the view.
Yes, that's a landscape.
Do you understand?
Yes, completely.
That is, so I get
Yes.
my cake and I eat it
You
too.
got it, because you're a landscape guy.
If I could jump in
I don't
here.
know.
You know, I think this was also, what these options show were a response to the comment that there was consensus about, pretty broad consensus, about linearity. And I have to tell you, there was quite a debate amongst us all as to what that actually meant, what that comment meant. And so perhaps you could clarify for us what you all meant by that term, linearity, and if this is responsive to that, because that was what we were attempting to do, was respond to that comment.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
might.
Commissioner LeBoy.
Spanish buildings aren't linear. They aren't. They're donuts. They're more often donuts. They are not linear. Even when they are linear, they're blocks of urban buildings stacked together, often with a series of courtyards in the middle.
Different sizes.
Of different sizes, all tacked together with different uses. But if you look at most of the civic buildings in Spain and here, they're donuts.
Okay. And personally, I think that there are enough opportunities on this site to have view corridors that don't have to be completely unobstructed. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, because you can stand here and you can see the mountains and you can see the creek, you know. So there's those opportunities. So I'm not going to really press that point with you because I think it's more important to have the meandering, serendipitous, organic circulation. Okay, the last...
Mr. Chair,
yes.
one quick
Yes.
comment. I want to repeat. The more we hash the plan, the less likely you are to be loose enough when you go to design the exterior elevations to be creative and get that serendipity. Maybe there should be a 45-degree angle here. Maybe that building should be cocked a little bit. And you won't know that until you start elevating. And that is more important in resolving all this than the plan is. I know you got to start somewhere. But the plan's going to change. And the more time you spend on the plan and the more time we spend, the less open we are going to be to imaginative exterior elevations.
I agree with that.
And I speak by 50 years' experience, and it's the only way to do it.
Okay. Last question I want to ask, and this does have to do with sort of elevating the building, is, and it also goes to the height variance, but I want to talk about roof massings, and because we gave you direction to break up roof massings, we're giving you direction today to maybe celebrate that one or two buildings with that, what did you call it, the basilical roof mass. So I'm going to take a straw vote on that.
And there's really just, there's two. The two big exhibit galleries.
Yes.
Okay, who my question is going to be, who can support the basilical type roof mass?
I can.
On
the two galleries, yeah.
Mr. Sharp? No.
I have no opinion.
Okay, so Sharp dissented, rest supported.
But I would like to temper that with just that I think for that to be successful, that then goes back into the idea of the variation of roofs. So if those are the primary roofs, then you end up with others that are going to be subordinate, and that's where you get into the height variance.
All of this is tied to things that will change the other thing. So it's, you know, a straw vote is just meant to sort of give you direction. It's not necessarily definitive.
Right.
Okay.
And may I ask those two summaries that we tried to put together in terms of understanding your intent,
Okay.
Was that?
You want my opinion of that?
Yes, thank you.
I'll be happy to give it to you.
Thank you. Go, Phil.
This, Suzette, is a given.
Okay.
You're doing, every applicant is doing this. This
Right.
is what
And
you're
this is
expected
what
to do.
This is what you have told us is
Right.
what I was doing.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Overall, it was very difficult to read because it seemed to be rhetoric.
Okay.
And I know you want my honest opinion,
Uh-huh.
and that's why I'm giving it to you.
Okay.
That's my interpretation of it.
Okay.
I don't know what the rest of the commissioners felt. Maybe I'm being a bit too strong. I did read this at 7 o'clock at night, probably not in the best mood,
Okay.
but I had a hard time getting through it, and then this is just like, come on, we know this.
Okay.
It's a given. You're supposed to
Right.
do this.
Right.
So, other commissioners, if they want to weigh in.
Written for you, not for me.
I understand. But that's what we're trying, that's what I understood.
You know, I
what
think
we
would
were
have been
saying.
more important,
Yeah.
excuse me for interrupting you, but probably would have been a bullet list of your understanding of HLC comments.
Of each of the comments.
Not necessarily each of them, but more cogent ones, more one, you know.
I would have preferred that taking a comment and going, at least on part of the plan, is this what
This
you're
is one,
talking
I
about?
see.
Without trying to solve the whole site, sort of like, is this what you're talking about? Is this what you're talking about?
Is this the character I'm supposed to capture?
Thank you.
That help?
Yes, it does help.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Did we clarify or cloud?
No, I think you did.
Both.
Yeah.
You've done your job.
Oh, ouch. No, I really don't want to hear that, Walter. I don't. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for staying.
I mean, I hope it was.